After inheriting my father's assets, I've had to make some difficult decisions. I was the only one mentioned in his will, as I'm an only child and my mother passed away long ago. For most of my life, it was just my father and me. He was the best father I could have asked for, working tirelessly to provide for me, while still making time to enjoy life together. However, our family situation was complicated by my extended family on my mother's side. They were constantly asking my father for money, to the point where he had to take on a third job just to meet their demands. I never understood why he felt obligated to support them, but I imagine he felt it was his responsibility after my mother's passing. Seeing the stress they caused him made me resent them, even as a child. When my father passed away suddenly in a tragic accident, I was devastated. I had lost my only true family. The grief was overwhelming, and I fell into a deep depression, isolated in my university dorm without my father to come home to. It was during this difficult time that I learned the full extent of my father's generosity. His will had left everything, his assets, properties, and bank accounts, to me and me alone. My extended family received only a few personal mementos. I was surprised, but it made sense given how much they had taken from my father over the years. As I began sorting through my father's affairs, I discovered that he had been making monthly transfers from his accounts to support my cousins and grandparents on my mother's side. Seeing this, I made the decision to stop those payments. After all, it was now my money, and I didn't feel obligated to continue funding my relatives, especially after how they had treated my father. This decision, however, would soon come back to haunt me. A month after I stopped the payments, my relatives started calling, furious that the money had stopped. They argued that it was my father's promise to them, and that I had no right to take it away. When I firmly told them it was my choice now, they became increasingly hostile, even going so far as to show up at my dorm. Convinced that I was in the right, I brushed off their demands and threats. Little did I know, they were preparing to take me to court over the matter. The audacity of my relatives to sue me over money that was rightfully mine infuriated me. But as a college student, the prospect of having to hire a lawyer and defend myself in court was a daunting one. Still, I was certain the court would see reason and side with me. The first trial was just the beginning of a drawn-out legal battle. My relatives argued that the monthly payments were a promise my father had made, and that I had no right to stop them. My lawyer and I countered that the money was now legally mine, and the decision of what to do with it was mine alone. The jury, however, seemed unconvinced, and the case was extended to a second trial. As the legal proceedings dragged on, the stress of the situation weighed heavily on me. I had lost my father, my sole family, and now I was being forced to fight for what was rightfully mine. The thought of my relatives tormenting me the way they had tormented my father was infuriating. But with each passing trial, my confidence in the justice system began to waver. Were they really going to side with my greedy, entitled relatives over me? The third trial came and went, and still the jury remained undecided. I was at my wits' end, exhausted from the emotional toll and the financial burden of the legal battle. And then the final verdict was announced. The jury's decision came down in favor of my relatives. I was stunned, unable to believe that the court was siding with them over me. My lawyer advised me not to agitate the situation further, as the jury had spoken. Apparently, they believed that the monthly payments my father had been making were a promise that I was now obligated to uphold, even though the money was legally mine. Defeated, I went home that day and cried myself to sleep. The money my father had left me was meant to be mine, to use as I saw fit. But now I was being forced to hand it over to the very people who had caused him so much stress and hardship throughout his life. It seemed horribly unjust. Yet, as I reflected on the situation, I realized that despite the court's ruling, I was still in a relatively fortunate position. While I would have to continue the monthly payments for the next 4 months, I would still be left with a sizable inheritance from my father's accounts and properties. It wasn't the victory I had hoped for, but it wasn't a complete loss either. In the end, I decided to focus on the positives. I still had a roof over my head, an education, and the resources to live comfortably. And more importantly, I had the chance to make amends with the rest of my family, the ones who hadn't been as aggressively demanding as my cousins. I started by reaching out to my aunt and uncle, the ones who hadn't been as heavily involved in the court case. They were receptive to my olive branch, and we were able to put the past behind us and start fresh. It felt good to have some semblance of family in my life again, even if it wasn't the same as having my father. Next, I gathered the courage to visit my grandparents on my mother's side. They had been on the opposing side in the court case, and I knew it wouldn't be easy. But I realized that they were just as much victims of the situation as I was. They were old and in need of financial support, and my father had been providing that for them. I couldn't fault them for fighting to maintain that lifeline. When I spoke to them, I apologized for the stress I had caused and acknowledged that they were simply trying to take care of themselves. I offered to continue sending them monthly payments, even though I wasn't legally obligated to do so. Their faces lit up with gratitude, and I could see the weight lifted from their shoulders. As I left their home, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I had made amends with the family members who mattered most to my father, and that felt like the right thing to do. It didn't undo the pain and anger I felt towards my cousins, but it was a step in the right direction. In the months that followed, I continued to visit my grandparents and maintain a cordial relationship with my aunt and uncle. The monthly payments to my relatives finally came to an end, and I was relieved to have that burden lifted. But more than that, I felt a sense of closure and a renewed appreciation for the family I did have left. As I stood in front of my father's grave, I couldn't help but feel that he would be proud of the path I had chosen. It wasn't the easy route, but it was the right one. I vowed to continue honoring his memory by living my life with the same kindness and generosity that he had shown, even in the face of adversity. The decision to cut ties with my greedy cousins was still a difficult one, but I knew it was necessary for my own well-being. I couldn't allow them to continue causing me the same stress and heartache they had inflicted on my father. Perhaps one day, when the wounds had healed, I could try to mend those relationships as well. But for now, I was focused on moving forward and building a life that would make my father proud. Little by little, the pain of his loss was becoming easier to bear. I still missed him terribly, but I knew that he was watching over me, guiding me through this new chapter of my life. With his memory as my inspiration, I was determined to create a future that would honor his legacy and the values he had instilled in me. As I turned to leave the cemetery, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead might not be easy, but I knew I had the strength to navigate it. My father's trust in me and the lessons he had taught me would be my compass. And with my newfound family connections, I wouldn't be facing it alone. The next few months passed in a blur as I focused on getting my life back on track. The monthly payments to my relatives had finally come to an end, and I was relieved to have that burden lifted. With a legal battle behind me, I could finally start to rebuild and move forward. One of the first things I did was to visit my father's grave more regularly. I found solace in those moments of quiet reflection, talking to him as if he were still there, listening. It helped me to process the grief and find the strength to carry on. As I continued to heal, I also made a conscious effort to mend the relationships with my aunt, uncle, and grandparents. They had been caught up in the legal drama, but they were still family, the only family I had left. I knew my father would have wanted me to keep them close. My visits with my grandparents were especially meaningful. They were so grateful for the financial support I provided, and I could see the weight lifted from their shoulders. Seeing them happy and cared for brought me a sense of peace, knowing that I was honoring my father's legacy in a small but meaningful way. With my aunt and uncle, the path to reconciliation was a bit more challenging, but we were able to put the past behind us and focus on rebuilding our relationship. I shared stories of my father, and they, in turn, opened up about their own memories and regrets. It was a cathartic process, and slowly but surely, the walls began to come down. As I reconnected with my relatives, I also made a conscious effort to distance myself from my cousins. The wounds from the court battle were still raw, and I couldn't bring myself to forgive their greed and entitlement. I politely declined any attempts at reconciliation, explaining that I needed time and space to heal. It wasn't an easy decision, but I knew it was necessary for my own well-being. I couldn't allow my cousins to continue causing me the same stress and heartache they had inflicted on my father. Perhaps one day, when the dust had settled, I could try to mend those relationships as well. But for now, I was focused on surrounding myself with the family members who truly cared. In the meantime, I threw myself into my studies and extracurricular activities, determined to make the most of my father's legacy. I knew he would have wanted me to succeed, to live a life filled with purpose and fulfillment. And so I poured my energy into my schoolwork, joined a few student organizations, and even started exploring potential career paths. As the months passed, I gradually rediscovered my sense of joy and purpose. The pain of my father's loss would always be there, but it was becoming easier to bear. I knew he was watching over me, guiding me through this new chapter of my life. And with the support of my renewed family connections, I felt stronger and more resilient than ever before. One day, as I stood in front of my father's grave, I felt a sense of clarity and resolve. I would honor his memory by living a life of kindness, generosity, and integrity, just as he had done. I would use my inheritance wisely, investing in my future and giving back to those in need. And I would never forget the hard-won lessons I had learned about the true meaning of family. As I turned to leave the cemetery, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The road ahead might not be easy, but I knew I had the strength to navigate it. My father's trust in me and the values he had instilled would be my compass. And with my newfound family connections, I wouldn't be facing it alone. With a renewed sense of purpose, I stepped out into the world, ready to forge a future that would make my father proud. The pain of the past had forged me into a stronger, wiser person, and I was determined to use that strength to create a life that would be a testament to my father's memory.